And we're back with Philip Davies. Now, many of the people watching this, in fact, nearly all of them, are going to have one eye or two on the upcoming gambling review, which is a vital moment not only for the industry but also for the sport of racing, which is very closely linked with it. And I first want to start out with talking a bit, or asking you a bit, I should say, about the Gambling Commission. How do you think as a body they're performing at the moment?
I'm not a great fan of the Gambling Commission, to be perfectly honest. I think my view is that it seems that the qualification to work in a senior role at the Gambling Commission is to know absolutely nothing about gambling, to be perfectly honest. And some of the recent appointments have just reinforced that opinion that I've got about the Gambling Commission. So I'm not a big fan. I don't really think that people on there really understand gamblers or gambling or betting, and I think that's a shame, really. So yeah, I'm not their greatest fan.
Would you create an ombudsman for the industry?
Yeah, I think I probably would. I mean, there is IBAS at the moment, but I'm not entirely sure how effective IBAS are or how trusted they are with punters. You know, people have different opinions about that. So I think there is an argument for having an ombudsman who is set up officially to deal with disputes between punters and the industry.
Now, the Gambling Review in itself, you know, a lot of people worry that the Gambling Review is focusing too much on one single subject, namely responsible gambling and affordability, and that you know, the weakness of the Gambling Commission, data and tracking, customer management restrictions, people losing money without protection if a bookmaker goes bust, etc. A lot of people feel those concerns are being sidelined. Do you think this review has been allowed to become about one subject, and do you think that anybody in particular might be benefiting from that?
Well, I think there's a very strong anti-gambling lobby which focuses on those issues, and that sets the political agenda, and that's the agenda that the government has to feel it needs to respond to. So I think there's a certain inevitability that it's going to focus on that, because that's where all the media activity is, that's where all the lobbying activity is, and so that's just the way of the world. I think, though, that the Gambling Review should look at wider matters, to be perfectly honest. And look, people will say generally I'm supportive of the gambling industry. I would say in many respects I'm not. I'm supportive of people having the freedom to gamble. That's what I'm a supporter of. I think the gambling industry historically has been pretty slow to deal with some of the concerns that people have had. I think they're doing a lot better now under the guise of the BGC. I think they've moved things on a lot, and I think lots of people in the industry are now much more switched on too. So I think they've made big steps forward. But I think there are issues that the gambling industry need to address. You know, restricting people's bets for me is a real big issue, and I hope the government will look at that, to be perfectly honest. I mean, look, actually many of my colleagues who don't understand betting or gambling, they can't believe that bookmakers restrict people's stakes. They think that they can't imagine that happens. But obviously, you know, lots of people who are regular punters, that's an everyday experience for them. And I think the gambling industry's got in a danger of actually ruining itself. Well, the thing that if you're in the gambling industry, what you're trying to sell to people, you're trying to sell to people the possibility. Yes, you're going to make an event that you're watching more interesting. That's a key part of it. But surely you're selling a dream that you could possibly win, that you can win some money from doing this. You can beat the bookmakers. Well, that dream is pretty much dead for many people, because, you know, if you show the first sign that you might be winning a few quid here and there, you're restricted to minuscule stakes. Well, what kind of a dream is that to sell to people? You know, you can bet with us, but only if you lose. If you win, we're not interested in you. And that's what so much of the gambling industry is doing to punters at the moment. And it's going to destroy itself if it carries on down that route, and it's sort of all shareholder focused activity. And I think, you know, the government needs to look at these things. It's got to be a quid pro quo. You know, the betting industry can't say on one hand, actually, it's terrible for the government to intervene to restrict the amount that people can stake on their betting, whilst at exactly the same time the bookmaking industry are restricting the stakes of other people on their betting. You can't have it both. Either you don't believe in people being restricted and people should be free to bet what they want, or you don't. The bookmakers are trying to have it both ways, and I think the government's should push back at bookmakers on these kinds of things and actually say, look, we want to make this fair for people who have a gambling addiction or at risk of having a gambling addiction, but also we want to make it fairer for punters more generally and how they're treated by bookmakers, because there is this cartel at the moment that operates these excessive, in my opinion, restrictions on people's betting.
Would you bring in some sort of minimum bet limits to the UK? You have to lay to lose so many pounds on a sporting event or whatever, or any sort of event?
Yeah, I'm quite attracted by that. I know they do it in Australia, but actually they've been doing it on the race courses for many, many years. Race courses have had bookmakers have had to put their little sign up to say, we'll lay any horse to lose a certain amount of money. And so if it's good enough for the race courses, why should it not be good enough for everybody else? So yeah, I am rather attracted by that. I'd rather it didn't need to happen, and that bookmakers would actually see that this was an issue themselves. But if they won't, and they carry on in the way they are, then that may be the way we have to go.
You were speaking about the BGC earlier. Do you think that they are representing the industry, in the right way, and that they're a net good? And I ask this just because there have been some instances of controversy with regards to, what some people would say are very forceful approaches from senior people at the BGC to criticisms which don't paint the industry in a good light. And I was wondering what you thought about that, holding the position that you do.
No, I think the BGC have been a real force for good in the industry. I think that they've really stepped things forward in terms of how important bookmakers take things like responsible gambling and understand what they need to do to look after their customers a lot better. So yeah, Bridget Simmons, the chairman, and Michael Duggar, the chief executive, I think have done a really good job. I think they've united the industry in a way that it probably never has been before. I mean, for years the gambling industry used to commit mutual suicide by fighting amongst itself, and different elements of the industry saying, we're really good, they're terrible, attack them, leave us alone. And that went on for years, that kind of mutual suicide. So no, I think they've done a really good job. It's been a big task for them to deal with some of the issues, and I think they've done a really good job.
Regarding another part of the betting industry, but this is more focusing on punter experiences now, but there are exchange platforms planning to use Betfair, Smartest and the like. Do you think they've been a net positive or negative for the punter in your experience? And do you use them?
I don't use Betfair and BetDAC. I do check the prices on there though, because it's very, I do follow the market. I have used them in the past, and I'm not averse to using them, but I tend not to bet with them at the moment. I tend to use traditional bookmakers. But have they been? I think I think they've been a net positive. I think they've been very difficult for bookmakers, but for punters, I think the exchanges have been a net positive for punters. I think they've reduced the margins that used to exist on horse racing massively. So that's really been a positive thing. A lot of people have this two sides of the coin about whether or not people being able to lay horses led to more cheating in racing and that kind of thing. And yeah, I'm sure for a while that there probably was more of that when it first came out, but I think that the authorities have really got a grip of that now, and actually it probably allowed people to make it easy to be caught cheating. Actually, I'm sure it hasn't just happened since the start of exchanges. So I suspect it's even had a net benefit in that regard too. So yeah, I think for punters, exchanges have definitely been a positive.
And going back to something which is, I think, a bigger policy issue, but a big argument we're hearing is about drawing the line between sports betting, and events-based betting, and casino-style products that are offered, it might seem a basic question, but actually it's going to be a rather key one. For you, is there a line to be drawn between sports betting and casino products? Because there are many people out there who would argue that it should all be lumped into one pot when it comes to gambling and what people are winning and losing, etc. And as such, we got under the same umbrella for, say, affordability checks.
Yeah, I've got mixed views about this. I mean, I can see the distinction between what you might call games of skill, horse racing, and all kinds of sports betting, where people take a judgment based on what their opinion is, and games which are just games of chance, roulette or something, where any number can come out of the hat and there's no skill involved. I can see why people might want to make a distinction between those two things, and I think there is clearly a distinction between them. So I get that side of it. On the other hand, though, as a libertarian, look, I'm not interested. I don't like casino products. I never wanted to play on a fixed odds betting terminal in a betting shop. I couldn't see what the attraction was personally. But look, I don't think I came into politics to stop everybody else from doing all the things that I don't happen to like myself. And so I'm rather nervous about me saying, well, actually, look, I think this is really bad for you doing these products, but this is okay. People should be free to spend their own money as they see fit. So I'm slightly conflicted, because I can see that there is a distinction. But would I want to, in effect, treat somebody who prefers playing roulette or casino products or whatever? Would I want to treat them as a second-class punter? There's something about that I don't really like. So, unusually for me, I might sit on the fence on that one, William.
And just last but not least, with affordability checks, a lot of people in racing have expressed a great fear that, for example, checks on anything of 100 a month or even on 500 a month, which I think is where Flutter has put their line down, would be sort of ruinous for the industry. Is there a number you think, do you have a rough number in your head that you think checks should be brought in at? Let's say for racing on an account over a month.
I don't think it's about. I mean, it depends what we're looking at. Are we looking at how much people deposit? Are we looking at how much people lose? How are we looking at how much people stake? Because obviously there's a massive difference between all of those things, and I think people have got to be very, very careful. I think that, look, the one thing I learned when I was in our betting shop was that even though we knew our customers really well, I had no idea what resources they had behind them. I had no idea whether people were millionaires or whether they had nothing. I didn't know that, and I wouldn't want to intrude on that. That's for me, that's private. And so people have to decide for themselves. We've got to have individual responsibility. People have got to decide for themselves how much they're comfortable betting and losing, and bookmakers should be able to assist them to make sure that they stick to any of those limits that they've imposed on themselves. But I don't think bookmakers or anybody or governments can say to somebody, you should only be able to lose this amount of money on betting. Because where do we draw the line on that? We're going to start saying, well, you were going to say that you can only spend this amount of money on shoes every month, because then above that's excessive and you don't really need them. I mean, I just don't like that level of state interference. So I prefer individual responsibility, people setting their own limits, whether it's time limits or stake limits, deposit limits, whatever. And the bookmaker should be there to make sure that people can stick to them and don't go off the rails. But I certainly don't want to live in a country where the government tells me how much I can spend on a particular leisure activity. That seems to me like a rather bad sledgehammer to crack a nut, and it doesn't actually target people who have got a problem. Let's focus all of our efforts on people who've got a problem.
I must have one last follow-up to it, which is just that the idea, let's say, removing a stake limit or removing a deposit limit, the idea of a loss limit surely can, in that net, very effectively target people who've got a problem. You can make the intervention there and then, and you wouldn't have some of the stories we've seen of people losing, say, 5-6 figures. If, for example, there was a loss limit of, say, £500 or £1,000 a month, some people will have that argument in response. What do you say to them?
Well, look, the thing is, it depends how strictly it's going to be enforced, for one thing. There are lots of punters, successful punters, who lose over £1,000 in a month, or even £2,000 or £5,000 in a month. They're winning overall, but they have, I've seen lots of the betting people series, you hear all of them, some of the most successful punters that you've spoken to, that Simon's spoken to, about how they've gone through, how do you deal with a bad patch? Well, I mean, how does that work? If you're a successful punter, you don't got a problem. You're actually a net winner over the year, but you're going through a rough patch. So it depends how these rules are going to be applied, because if you were just to have you've lost over £1,000 this month, you can't have another bet, that would, to me, would be ridiculous. And so where do you set where would you set a limit? For some people, losing £1,000 a month would be catastrophic for them. So that it's very difficult to set a figure and say that should apply to everybody, because everybody's circumstances are so very different.
One last sort of devil's advocate question to throw there, but there are some situations where you might hit a loss limit, and then the operator will ask you for proof of funds, source of income, incomings, outgoings, and then you are allowed to crack on if you prove that's within your range. In principle, is that something you're comfortable with?
Well, I think this goes to show how difficult it is to set any kind of rule and limit, because it's too difficult a measure to apply to everybody. I come back to the point of how much can somebody afford to lose. I don't know. Ultimately, only they know. I mean, if I gave you my bank statement, and just say, for example, it showed that I had a disposable income of £1,000 a month, and I then asked 100 people, how much can that person afford to lose on betting? You would get 100 different answers. Some people would say, well, they can afford to lose £1,000 a month because that's their disposable income. Some people might say, well, hold on a minute, they've got to buy food and they've got to buy clothes and whatever, so maybe it's only £100 a month. How do you make that decision? It's an impossible decision to make. It's completely subjective. It's not objective at all. So I just think they are very, very poor measures, to be honest. Bookmakers are being forced into them by the regulator, but I think often they're quite meaningless, and it's just like another hoop to jump through for people to put a bet on. And often people think, well, I don't even see the point of this. How has this proved anything? You can look at what my income is, but how do you know what all my outgoings are? I think it's very dangerous to go down that route, because it tends to be a meaningless figure that you come out with at the end of it all, and it's just a pointless bureaucracy. And all it will do either people will say, well, do you know what? I can't be bothered with this. I won't bet at all. Can't be bothered. Or I'll bet with my mates, because, and there'll be somebody who will take up the slack somewhere in the local pub or in the local betting shop or whatever. Or people will go to the black market. And that just seems to me to be an inevitable consequence. If you make things too onerous, people will find another route to do it. And the government have got to avoid that from happening.
Phil Davies, thank you very much.
Thank you.